3:17 a.m. That's the exact moment my past decided to collect its debt. You know that specific silence of a Chicago winter? It's heavy, almost metallic. I was dead to the world in my apartment in Wicker Park, dreaming of nothing in particular, when my nightstand exploded with light. My phone didn't just ring, it screamed. An unknown to 106 area code Seattle. My heart didn't just beat. It hit my ribs like a trapped bird. You don't get calls from your old life at 3 in the morning unless someone is dead or about to be. Is this Robin? The voice on the other end was too calm, that practiced clinical ice of a trauma nurse. This is Nurse Miller from Harborview Medical Center. We have Elena Vance in the The name hit me like a physical blow. Elena, the woman I hadn't spoken to in 3 years. The woman whose last text to me was a cold, "Don't contact me again." After the divorce settlement was finalized, there's been a massive pile-up on I-5, the nurse continued. And suddenly, the room felt like it was losing oxygen. Multiple vehicles. Elena was T-boned by a semi. She's in critical condition, Robin. She lost one kidney on impact, and the other is hemorrhaging. The UNOS list is too long for the window we have. She's got maybe 6 hours before systemic failure. I sat up, the cold air hitting my bare chest. Why are you calling me? We're divorced. It's been years. There was a brief, agonizing pause. I could hear the rhythmic beeping of monitors in the background, miles away. You're still listed as her primary emergency contact and her healthcare proxy, she said quietly. She never changed the paperwork. And according to her digital records, you're an O-negative match. She doesn't have a family left, Robin. You're the only name in her file. You're literally her last shot. I stared at the blinking LED clock. 3 years of therapy, 2,000 miles of distance, and a brand new life, all erased by a digital file she was too heartbroken or too stubborn to update. I sat there on the edge of the mattress, my feet touching the cold hardwood, staring at a shadow on the wall. The nurse was still talking, but all I could hear was the ghosts. 12 years. That's how long Elena and I occupied the same space. We started in a cramped studio in Queen Anne, sharing cheap takeout and big dreams, and ended in a sterile lawyer's office in downtown Seattle, refusing to even look at each other. We were together for a decade, married for 7, and by the end, we had turned into experts at domestic warfare. We loved each other like a Pacific Northwest storm stunning from a distance, but devastating if you were caught in the middle of it. I remembered the suburban dream fight. She wanted the white fence in Bellevue, the quiet streets, the built-in stability. I was chasing a VP title at a tech firm, obsessed with the energy of the city, working 80-hour weeks until my eyes bled. Every dinner became a deposition. Every credit card statement was a casualty of war. We fought about the $12,000 we lost on a failed investment, about why I was never home for an anniversary, and why she felt like a stranger in her own house. Why? The time the judge signed off on the papers, I was down $45,000 in legal fees, and a massive chunk of my soul. I'd spent 3 years in Chicago convincing myself that the Elena chapter was burned to ash. I built a wall around my life so high that nothing could climb over it. And yet, here I was, holding a phone that felt like a live wire. Why was I the one she needed? Out of all the people she'd met in the last 3 years, the friends she chose over me, the men she must have dated, the life she built out of the wreckage of us, why was my name the only one left in that folder? Was it a mistake? Or was it her final, silent way of saying that even when we were destroying each other, we were the only ones who truly knew how to stay? The irony was a bitter pill. I had spent years trying to forget her face, and now a total stranger was telling me that my blood was the only thing that could keep that face from disappearing forever. The digital clock on my nightstand flickered. 3:22 a.m. The nurse's words were a ticking bomb. If I was going to do this, I had exactly 90 minutes to catch the last red eye out of her heart. My mind was a chaotic map of logistics and guilt. I turned my head and looked at Sarah. She was sleeping peacefully, her hair fanned out across the pillow we'd picked out together at Crate and Barrel. She was there after the quiet, uncomplicated life I had fought so hard to build. How do you wake someone up and tell them you're flying 2,000 miles away to cut a piece of yourself out for the woman who shattered your life? How do you explain that your ex isn't just a memory, but a dying woman who still holds your medical proxy? I couldn't. The words felt too heavy for the middle of the night. I moved like a ghost. I threw a pair of jeans, a hoodie, and my passport into a duffel bag. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely zip it. I grabbed a post-it note from the kitchen counter and wrote 3 words: family emergency. Flying home. I didn't specify which home. I didn't specify which family. The Uber ride to the airport was a blur of orange streetlights and the smell of cheap air freshener. As we hit I-90, the driver was humming along to some lo-fi jazz, oblivious to the fact that I was deciding whether to keep an organ or save a ghost. That's when the realization hit me, cold and sharp. This wasn't just about being a good guy. It was about the haunting. If I stayed in Chicago, if I let that 6-hour window close and Elena slipped away, I would be tied to her forever. Every time I looked in a mirror, I'd see a man who let a life extinguish because he was too proud to forgive. If she died because I didn't show up, she'd never leave my head. To finally be free of her, I had to save her. I reached the terminal with 10 minutes to spare. The airport was a cavern of echoes and tired travelers. As I scanned my boarding pass, I felt like I was stepping off a cliff. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Sarah. "You okay?" Heard the door. I didn't reply. I just turned off the phone and stepped onto the jet bridge. Seattle greeted me with its signature grey drizzle. But the air inside Harborview Medical Center was different. It smelled of industrial bleach, floor wax, and that heavy, metallic scent of finality. I hadn't stepped foot in this city for 3 years, and now the familiar skyline felt like a distorted reflection of a life I tried to delete. I found the ICU on the 4th floor. The fluorescent lights were humming, a sharp, buzzing contrast to the muffled sounds of rhythmic pumping and distant monitors. I walked toward the glass partition of room 412, and my legs felt like lead. There she was, Elena, but not the Elena who could command a room with a single look, or the one who once threw a glass of Napa Cabernet against the wall during our $45,000 divorce battle. She looked impossibly small under the thin hospital sheets. She was swallowed by a web of plastic tubes, 4 lines, and a ventilator that was forcing air into her lungs with a mechanical hiss thump. Her skin wasn't the vibrant tan I remembered from our summers in Cannon Beach. It was the color of damp parchment. "You actually came." I turned. It was Leo, her older brother. He looked like he'd aged a decade since the settlement hearing. His eyes were bloodshot, and he was clutching a lukewarm cup of cafeteria coffee like a lifeline. We had once been friends, barbecue buddies, brothers-in-law, until the lawyers made us enemies. I didn't think I had a choice, I said, my voice sounding raspy even to me. Leo looked through the glass at his sister, his jaw tightening. "A kid in a lifted F-150, he whispered, led a red light at 60 miles an hour. He was so drunk, he didn't even realize he'd hit anything. He walked away with a scratch and a court date. Elena, she took the whole impact on the driver's side. She's the only one paying the bill for his Saturday night." I looked back at her. The woman who used to scream at me for leaving wet towels on the bathroom floor was now fighting for the right to just exist. It's a strange thing, seeing the person you once considered your greatest adversary reduced to a fragile collection of failing organs. The anger I'd carried for 3 years didn't vanish, but it suddenly felt heavy, pointless. She wasn't my wife anymore. She wasn't even my friend. But she was a human being whose life was currently held together by a machine, waiting for a piece of the man she had pushed away. The wait was the worst part. I sat in a plastic chair in the hallway, the kind that's designed to make sure you never get comfortable. They had taken my blood, my history, my vitals, treating me less like a person and more like a biological spare part. About an hour later, Dr. Sterling walked in. He was a tall man with a face that looked like it had seen too many last chances. He was holding a clipboard, and the look on his face told me the universe had a very dark sense of humor. "Robin," he said, skipping the pleasantries, "we've tested everyone. Her brother, her cousins, 2 friends who flew in this morning. None of them are compatible. Leo is a B positive, and the others didn't clear the cross match." He paused, looking at his charts. "But you're not just a match. You're a statistical miracle. Blood type, HLA markers, tissue compatibility. It's like you were built from the same blueprint. You are the only one on the board." I felt the air leave the room. It was a sick joke. I had spent 3 years and a small fortune in legal fees trying to surgically remove this woman from my life. I had changed my number, moved 2 time zones away, and deleted every photo we ever took. I wanted her gone. I wanted her to be a ghost. And yet, here was the punchline. Medically, biologically, we were still perfectly in sync. After all the screaming, the broken plates, and the cold silence of the divorce court. Our bodies were still telling a story that we had tried to burn. The irony was suffocating. I was the one who walked away. I was the one who said, I can't do this anymore. And now, the cosmos was tapping me on the shoulder, pointing at the operating table, and saying, not so fast. You're the only one who can keep her in the world. I wasn't just her ex-husband anymore. I was her last 400 grams of hope. I had spent years trying to cut the tie between us, only to find out it was written into my very DNA. Dr. Sterling didn't give me a hero's welcome. He led me into a small, windowless office that felt like a confession booth and sat across from me. He looked at me not as a savior, but as a patient he was about to break. Robin, let's be very clear about the physics of this, he said, leaning forward. You're 34. You've got at least 50 years of life ahead of you. Right now, you're healthy. But the moment I take that kidney, your margin for error disappears. If you get a chronic illness, if you're in an accident, if your remaining kidney fails 10 years from now, you become the one praying for a stranger to walk through those doors. This isn't a blood drive. It's a permanent physical sacrifice. You are voluntarily becoming less whole to save someone who, legally, is a stranger to you. He slid a thick stack of papers across the desk. The consent form. It was filled with words like renal failure, surgical risks, and long-term complications. You have every right to walk out, he added, his voice dropping an octave. No one would blame you. Not the hospital, not the family. You've already done more than most by just showing up. I looked at the pen sitting on the table. My mind flashed to Sarah back in Chicago, to our quiet Sunday brunches and the promotion I was supposed to be celebrating. Then I thought about the 12 years Elena and I had survived together. The road trips down Highway 101. The way she used to take her coffee. The way we cried when we realized our marriage was finally dead. The lawyers told us we were dissolved. The judge told us our obligations were over. But as I stared at that pen, I realized that 12 years of shared history doesn't just evaporate because a state official stamps a piece of paper. You can't outsource your humanity to a courtroom. It wasn't about loving her anymore. We'd broken that long ago. It was about the fact that I couldn't live in a world where I had the power to stop her light from going out and chose my own comfort instead. I picked up the pen. My hand was steady for the first time since the call. I signed my name at the bottom of the page. Robin Vance. Let's get it over with, I said. The transition from the hallway to the operating room felt like a descent into another world. Everything was too bright, too cold, and smelled of sharp iodine. They had me on a gurney, and the ceiling tiles blurred past like a film reel stuck on fast forward. I remember the anesthesiologist leaning over me, his voice muffled by a blue mask. Count backward from 10, Robin. I didn't even make it to 7. As the darkness rushed in, my last thought wasn't of the divorce or the $45,000 in legal bills. It was of a summer in 2018, both of us laughing under a shared umbrella in a sudden Seattle downpour. Then, total silence. When I finally clawed my way back to consciousness, the world was a haze of beige walls and the rhythmic click of a ventilator. The pain wasn't a sharp sting. It was a dull, heavy roar in my side, like someone had replaced a part of me with a hot brick. I tried to speak, but my throat was sandpaper. A nurse appeared in my periphery, checking my vitals. She saw my eyes open and leaned in close. She's stable, Robin, she whispered, and her smile was the first warm thing I'd felt in days. The transplant was a success. Your kidney started working the moment they hooked it up. She's going to make it. I closed my eyes and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 3 years. And then the tears came. Hot, silent streaks running down my temples into my hair. I wasn't crying because I was still in love with her. I wasn't crying because I wanted our old life back. That life was dead, and we had buried it ourselves. I was crying because a human being I had once shared my heart with was still breathing on this earth. I was crying because for the first time since the 3 o'clock a.m. call, the world felt like it had some kind of balance again. She was alive. And a piece of me was currently making sure she stayed that way. BYD3. The world had shrunk to the size of a hospital gown and the 4 walls of my recovery suite. Every time I moved, that hot prick in my side reminded me of the price of admission. But I couldn't leave, not yet. I needed to see the why with my own eyes. I was limping down the hallway, clutching my 4-pole like a crutch. When I saw them wheeling someone out of the elevator, it was her. Elena was in a wheelchair, draped in a heavy fleece blanket. She looked fragile, her skin still translucent, but her eyes, those sharp, observant eyes I'd spent a decade trying to read, were open. They were alive. As they wheeled her past me, the world stopped. The nurses didn't notice the static in the air, but for us, it was deafening. Our eyes met, and for the first time in 3 years, there was no static of litigation, no bitterness about who spent what, and no rehearsed anger. We were just two people who had survived a catastrophic wreck, one involving twisted metal on I-5, the other involving a slow-motion collision of the heart. She looked at me, her gaze traveling from my face down to where I was clutching my side, and her expression fractured. She didn't have the strength to speak, but she leaned forward slightly and mouthed her words. "Thank you." I didn't smile. I didn't say, "You're welcome." I just gave her a slow, heavy nod. It was the most honest conversation we'd had since our wedding vows. No shouting, no lawyers, no defense mechanisms, just a recognition of a debt paid in blood and a life saved. I checked myself out against medical advice that evening. I didn't wait for her to get better, didn't wait for a tearful reunion with her family, and I certainly didn't wait for a parade. I caught a cab back to CTC while the sun was setting behind the Olympics. As the plane leveled out over the Rockies, heading back to my real life in Chicago, I leaned my head against the cold window. I didn't need her gratitude. I just needed to know that somewhere down there, in the dark, she was breathing. Landing back in Chicago felt like stepping into a life that no longer fit. The city was moving at its usual frantic pace, but I was moving in slow motion, tethered to a physical ache that wouldn't let me forget. Coming back was hard. Sarah didn't meet me at the door with a hug. She met me with questions I couldn't answer in a way that made sense to someone who hadn't lived through the 10-year war. When she found out the family emergency was actually a major surgery for my ex-wife, the air in our apartment turned brittle. "You didn't just help her, Robin," she said, packing her bags a week later. "You gave her a part of your body. You're still tied to her in a way I can't compete with. I can't handle that kind of emotional weight." And just like that, the perfect life I'd built as a refuge from Elena collapsed too. Now, my life is a series of quiet adjustments. My side still aches when the Chicago humidity spikes, or when a storm rolls in of Lake Michigan, a sharp, stinging reminder that I'm literally not the man I used to be. A month after the surgery, my phone buzzed. A number I finally recognized. "Rubin?" Elena's voice was stronger, though it still had that post-trauma tremor. She told me she was recovering well. Then she dropped the news she was engaged to a guy named Mark, a realtor in Bellevue. A stable guy. The suburban dream guy. There was a long, heavy silence on the line. I could almost hear her heart beating through the 2,000 miles of fiber optic cable. "Why, Robin?" she whispered. "After everything we did to each other, why did you save me?" I looked out at the Chicago skyline, at the lights of the Hancock building piercing the fog. "Because, Elena," I said, and for the first time, the words didn't hurt. "Because you deserved a life. You deserve to see your 35th birthday and marry your realtor and buy that house with the fence. You deserve to keep living, even if I wasn't the one living it with you." We weren't right for each other, but that didn't make your life any less valuable. 6 months have passed since I sat on that bed in Chicago and answered a call from a ghost. If you saw me at a coffee shop in Wicker Park today, I'd look like any other 34-year-old guy scrolling through his emails. But underneath my shirt, I carry a jagged, silver line, a mirror image of the scar Elena carries 2,000 miles away. We aren't getting back together. Let's be clear about that. The surgery didn't magically fix the fact that we're still the same two stubborn, headstrong people who could agree on a floor plan or share a kitchen without starting a fire. We aren't a movie ending. We are just two survivors who finally stopped trying to win a war that ended years ago. But we do talk now. Really talk. Not through lawyers, not through gritted teeth, but with the quiet, stripped-down honesty of people who know exactly what the other is made of. There's no ego left when one person is literally functioning because of the other's sacrifice. Mark, her realtor, is still in the picture. I'm still navigating the dating scene in a city that feels a little emptier without Sarah. But strangely, I don't feel like I lost. They say you can't buy peace, but it turns out you can trade a piece of yourself for it. I learned that 12 years of history isn't a burden to be carried or a debt to be settled, it's just the soil you grow in. Sometimes you have to lose a physical part of yourself to finally understand who you actually are. I'm Robin. I'm 34. I live with one kidney and a quiet apartment that finally feels like home. I lost a marriage, 45 grand, and a long-term partner along the way. But for the first time in my life, when I look in the mirror, I don't see a man defined by what he walked away from. I see a man who showed up, and for the first time, I have peace. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. What do you think about this story? Let me know in the comments.